So Chris Lewis is a game maker, right?
Game analyst. I go with game analyst.
And Chris Lewis is in a PhD candidate here in the computer science department. He is working with Jim Whitehead.
Yes.
What's the name of your group?
It's fluid. I think we're currently going with Software Introspection Laboratory.
Software Introspection Laboratory.
Sounds very, very deep, doesn't it?
Tell me, what does that mean?
I don't think anyone knows.
Software introspection. You're looking at the platforms, right? Or you're looking at the programs?
Yeah, we're sort of we're sort of investigating software as sort of artifacts and sort of code sort of machines, as it were, and sort of trying to dig deep down into them, and what makes them tick and what makes the certain results that come out sort of important or meaningful. It's like I said, fluid.
And so Chris Lewis has you worked making data systems?
My interests are wide. Databases for a long time.
Well, isn't that the introspection part? Wouldn't that be looking at the databases? Is that possibly? Trying to make understanding of your group name. Sorry,
yes, no, I
connected.
I think there's no understanding of it. When you look so deep into the abyss, there's no understanding to come out again. So I would accept it, but do not try to explain it.
That's perfect, Chris Lewis. And is that how you work with Jim Whitehead?
Yes, I accept it, but don't attempt to explain it. Yes, that's pretty much how I work with him.
Magic. So, Chris, where are you at in your process here? We've got the first group of PhD students graduating this quarter, this June. It's really exciting. You're seeing your cohort, your colleagues. It's not really. Is it your cohort?
I tend to go with cabal.
Your cabal. and some of them are going to be moving off.
Yeah,
after 6-7 years. Something
like that. It's oddly bittersweet that you're really excited that all these people have sort of reached the end and sort of proven that you can do it too. Like there is a light at the end of the tunnel, but once they disappear into the light, they're not coming back, which is sort of a sad thing. You sort of expect to see all their empty desks next year, which will be nice because that means that people will actually get desks next year. So there won't have to be the classic knife fight that starts in the beginning of fall for a desk.
But there'll be a new crop.
Yes.
Of PhD students coming in.
Yes, I expect so.
So when did you start, Chris Lewis?
I started 4 years ago.
4 years ago.
Yes.
And so you're seeing some ending happening?
Some what, sorry?
The ending.
Yes. I think
light.
I've got 1 year. That's what I'm telling myself.
Excellent. So will you come back on next year and tell us about what you are going to be creating for your thesis, right?
Yes,
Are you already writing on it?
I'm already sort of getting there, right?
Do you have a title?
Retention engineering, I think.
Retention engineering, like memory. Now, does this have anything to do with social games?
Yeah, so what it is that we have, in computer science, there's a subsection of computer science called software engineering, which is how do we make software, what happens with all the teams, and how do we write code so that it's simple and maintainable and understandable. Most people that you would say are a programmer, say like Google, they would say they're software engineers, right? They're sort of engineering like bridges and castles and things just in code. And retention engineering is this idea that Jim and I came up with, which is that...
Jim Whitehead.
Yes, Jim Whitehead, my advisor. Which is that a lot of software we sort of assume... has always been assumed, in fact, that it does its job best when it does it quickly. So when I'm sitting down...
You want it to crunch fast. You want it to render fast. You want that car to go fast.
Yes, you have a particular task that you want to achieve. Like you are going to sit down at a word processor, and the thing you want to do is you've got to type a document. And whatever gets you from the beginning of the document to the end of the document as quickly as possible so you can shut Word again, that is positive, right? That's what software engineering is generally thought as being a good thing. But now we live in this world where, in fact, we don't want people to finish using software. We want people to come back to software again and again and again. We want people to continue, Facebook wants you to continue logging into Facebook so they can show you adverts. Angry Birds wants you to continue playing Angry Birds every day so then you can show your friends and then they'll buy Angry Birds. Zynga wants you to play Farmville every day so you can send other notifications to your friends that you're playing Farmville, so they'll play Farmville, and maybe 1% of those people actually spend money on Farmville, right? So we've moved from this place where instead of just trying to like get people in and out of software as quickly as possible, we now have all these companies that are building, multi-million-dollar sort of Scrooge McDuck money bins based on the idea that we want people to come back again and again and again and again.
And spend as much time.
Playing
their game.
Their software. You can think of Facebook as one of these platforms. You can think of Flickr. They want you to continue uploading your photos to Flickr, because if you keep doing that, you'll keep spending your $10 subscription fee every year. Everybody wants you to pay them again and again now.
It's a subscription-based economic model.
Yes.
And that's the way people are figuring out they can get money on the internet, which has been the question for the last, 20 years?
Yes, probably. I'd say so. Yeah, and so we're in this sort of tricky area where sort of all the computer science literature hasn't really dealt with this. It hasn't been something which has been very interesting because it hasn't come up. And academia works real slow, real glacially, right? Like you sort of think, researchers in computer science, they must be at the forefront of things, right? But generally, like, they're at the forefront of very individualized fields. So if a new field pops up, we're quite slow to react as an academic institution. That's why there are so few places, that such as UC Santa Cruz that has a game design degree, right? The game design major here
is one of the beginning. Yeah. It's one of the few in the world.
Yeah, and yet it is also the undergraduate major in engineering with the most enrollment, right? So
because Jim Whitehead figured that out years ago and said, hey, I'm looking around, all these engineering schools are losing students. How do we attract them? Put in a game design.
Yeah, and so there isn't a lot of work on retention engineering about what it means to keep users.
But, I've heard at game conventions where you hear people like Will Wright, and they're trying to get people to play 500 hours a week on there. In fact, that's like the holy grail for game designers. I got that guy to sit and play for 500 hours is you've hit the jackpot.
Yeah, exactly.
And so it's been going on, and people have been creating games to make you suck in there for as long as possible, right?
Yeah, and so what we've got is this actually sort of quite weird situation where the most effective retention things we have are games. They actually are already software, and yet software engineering, this sort of this academic field, hasn't really paid much attention to it. So what I'm doing is I'm asking questions like, why do we want to play games, right? Am I now giving you an interview, but sort of thinking it'd be nice to be at home playing a game instead, right? This is sort of quite important to my research, right? That I'm able to talk to people about it and like set it out to people, but really I'd sort of want to go home and play video games, right?
Is that really? You would rather be doing that all the time?
I think for most people that, you always have that thing pop through your head, right? Like that you would rather be somewhere else, right? And, when you're sitting down to write an essay for homework for school, a lot of people are rather doing someone else, and they
like
do,
playing
right?
A game.
But when you think about it in these purely rational terms, it makes no sense. You're paying, UC tuition fees are as high as they've ever been, right? You are paying a lot of money for the ability to write that essay, right? That UC has gifted you this essay that you have paid money to write, but instead you're going to be busy playing something else. So what is it about that? Why do we keep doing that to ourselves, right? And we have these really crazy sort of retention machines that we just have there, and it's not, and it might not be video games. Video games might not be your thing, right? It might be Facebook, where you're idling away instead and procrastinating your way through. And it's not new either, right? Like, I sort of feel that Farmville is essentially, the solitaire or minesweeper of this generation, right? Like, everybody played solitaire in, the 90s instead of working on their TPS reports or whatever.
I was a big Tetris person.
Exactly. So what I've been doing is I've actually had to sort of step into the psychology literature, which makes me very nervous, because what I worry about is that, in fact, I'll say something which all the psychologists will go, no, that's completely wrong. You're such an idiot, right? But I do my best.
Bridge the software engineering to the psychology.
Yes, and so I've been looking into things about motivation theory, like what motivates you to do something rather than another thing. Things like behavioral economics, which is this idea that it's sort of the science of decision making. All things equal, which decision will you make? And there's all sorts of crazy stuff in these things. Like if you pay someone to do a task that requires creativity, they will do it worse than if you haven't been paid.
That makes sense.
Yes.
That's snuffing out that artistic inspiration. The muse does not like it.
Yeah, and it happens, there's science shows again and again, if you pay someone, they'll do it worse, right? They'll do their job worse. And there's all these sort of weird things, like the other thing.
It's really weird.
The other thing that
Chris Lewis is talking to us about his thesis. He's a game researcher here at computer software engineering, introspection, all kinds of craziness. And you're also researching what is a game, what makes people play game, those motivates. Or was he motivating to play the game?
Yeah, so there's this really useful theory called self-determination theory, which is the one I'm sort of building on.
Do you know who made this?
It's by a guy called Edward Detchi and Richard Ryan over at, I think they're at Rochester University in the Northeast. And this one's really neat. So this is sort of this description of why you do something at all. So they have three things: that you do something because you want to have autonomy when you do it, right? That you want to make choices and have the freedom to make choices that interest you. That you want to do something to experience mastery, that you want to get better at something. If you continue not getting better at something, you'll stop doing it. And the other thing is relatedness, that you want to feel like you're doing something with purpose that affects other people, that enhances your sort of social interactions. And when you think about it, video games do this really well, right? If you think about all the best games, they traditionally have lots of choices you can make, lots of interesting choices you can make that you actually want to do. Like you can think about lots of games where you're like, I really want to do this, but it won't let me, and you sort of feel like, this sucks, right? Mastery, that you only play games when you get better at it, right? Like we know that about games in particular, is that people continue to play games where they continue to learn and get better, and when they stop learning, they stop. And the final thing, relatedness, is sort of, that's the tricky one to sort of understand. Like, what does it mean to be related when you're playing a game, particularly when sort of everybody sees you like sat on the sofa, couch, America, sat on the couch, and you're sort of ignoring the wife. You're saying like, we need to go out, we need to go see friends. Like, no, I'm sort of happy here, right? Like, no, it's hard to see where's the relatedness. Who am I connecting with here? But the sort of research is being to say that, well, maybe you're clearly you're going to be connected with other people in the game if you're playing multiplayer games. You might be connected with people on like forums or talking around the water cooler about your favorite game, like what you did last night. Or it might even be with the characters in the game. Even the AI characters you can experience an actual meaningful connection with. And so what you have is this, that we have these sort of self-determination sort of aspects to games, and they just become these motivation machines. They just do this so well over and over again. They just churn out motivation, and that's why when you sit down thinking, I'm going to really write this word essay this time, this homework cannot be late again, you're still sort of thinking, I could just play a game for 10 minutes, right? But you can't. You really need to write that paper. And there's other sort of psychology things that go in that as well, like ego depletion. Like as you take active willpower to sit there and write that essay, it sort of depletes, right? You can sort of think of it as this big bucket with a big leak. And the more you're concentrating, the bigger the leak gets. And once that's empty, you are really susceptible to all sorts of things. And Farmville does this really well. So one thing that will happen in Farmville is that you'll run out of energy, right? Like you can only do so many actions a day, and when you take an action, it uses a piece of energy, and then once the energy's gone, you can't take any more actions, right? And once you reach that point, you're like, I really want to play more. And that's when they hit you, right? They go, once you really want to play more, that's when they go, hey, would you like to buy more energy? Right? And that's not just because it hits zero, it's because your ego is depleted, right? That you've lost the willpower to resist their shot at you. And you are more likely to buy it. It's why when you're losing on in certain online games.
So are you telling me that Zynga has psychologists that help them to develop these games so that they can deplete us of our egos and motivate us to buy more?
So this is something where if you ask them directly, they will say no. There was buried within a Time article a couple years ago which said that there was at least one behavioural psychologist on staff. And the sort of unwritten knowledge is that there probably are people that do know these things. that Zynga in particular are not making all that money by not knowing it. I can't confirm it. It's all alleged. I don't want to get into any sort of legal issues.
You could see the traces of it.
Yes.
By the way they operate.
Yes, and I've written a paper which I'm presenting in a couple of weeks, actually, which sort of says, there are lots and lots of little behavioral economics things in particular where you say, there's 8 or 9 patterns, and it's I don't think you came across these by accident, right? It's possible you did, right? It's probable you didn't. And whether other games sort of copy the Farmville template know these things or not, I don't know.
Right. They just know it works.
But yes. And it's really comforting to sort of think that, right? That the reason why I'm playing Farmville is just because it's pulling these little mental levers. That I have all these sort of pre-built biases which I can't control, and Farmville's doing this to me, right?
You're giving up your agency.
Yes, and for people who are very, particularly game designers, which are very anti-social game, that's a really comforting thought that, they're just tweaking you, right? But the more I've thought about it, the softer I am on it. That one thing which happens a lot is in behavioral economics is this thing called loss aversion, right?
What?
Loss aversion.
Loss?
Aversion. Aversion. So you don't want to lose something, right?
Loss aversion. I'm averting my fear of losing.
So if I give you $10 and you sort of imagine a little happiness scale, it will go up a certain amount, right? If I take $10 away from you, the amount of happiness you will lose is higher than you gained if I gave it to you, right? So you're always loss averse. You don't want to take a risk. This is why people don't put their money into stocks, instead put it into really sort of low yield savings accounts, because they don't like risk. People don't like risk. A lot of behavioral economics is all about this, right? And in Farmville, we have these things, right? That you plant a little seed and out pops a little tree or whatever that you have to harvest. And if you don't harvest it, it rots and dies and it's gone. And this really tweaks your loss aversion, that you don't want to lose that thing that you've got. It's not... And so that loss aversion is probably powerful enough to make you come back and make a mental note in your head that in 3 hours I need to come back to Farmville to get that stuff before it dies. And that's really quite powerful. But you have to care about it, right? And I've been thinking about...
And is that the relativity part of it? Is that where you get them to care? Is that when you get the empathy?
That's sort of like the secret sauce, right? Like this doesn't work unless you care about it. If I make a game where, for example, instead of the score going up as you kill enemies, the score goes down until you finish the level, right? You can imagine that, but you can. It's sort of, and that would be the same sort of thing, right? Instead of gaining score, you're losing score. But it's very hard to sit here and think, would that be all that compelling? Right? Does that really matter to me? And my guess is it probably doesn't, right? For the majority of people who don't care about the score they have, that loss is not something they care about, so will not actually entice them to play the game. The big question is, why do they care about virtual plants? And I actually spoke to John Romero about this, and John Romero is the man who created Doom, of all things.
And this is Chris Lewis.
And John Romero is
not a Milkovich, but
is like a massive sort of game design hero, right?
He did Dune?
He did Doom.
Doom,
yeah.
Yes.
And he was a real rock star programmer, driving Ferraris and stuff, crazy stuff. But now he makes social games, and he was talking to me about Farmville. He said, well, the reason people really like Farmville is because it's a farm, and it plays into this. The theme of the farm is something which really plays into American society, and probably a lot of Western societies, is the idea of the city life is such a rat race, and wouldn't it be nice to sit on the porch of a farm and drink lemonade and just sort of assume the farm sort of deals with itself, right? Like that's the dream, is that the farm deals with itself and you drink lemonade and some man comes and takes your milk and then you just get loads of money, right? When of course working on a farm is incredibly hard. But Farmville plays into this. Yeah, they are smelly and they're muddy, and you have to traipse around and always get up at 6 a.m. on Christmas Day, right? No way. So Farmville plays into this theme of
this romantic idea.
Yeah, and you don't want the romance to die. You don't want to have your plants die. And you don't want to have other people visit your farm and see that your plants died, right? Because there's a big status thing and a shame of I've created something beautiful, you should see it, versus I've created a dump, right? Just like you don't want people to see your yard and your yard's got a broken down car in it that's rusting away and, huge grass growing everywhere, moss, and you see people with gardens like that, and you're like, oh, why are you doing this, right? Like, you should stop doing this is bad. And for most people, they don't, right? They actually take care of their yard, even if they sort of feel a bit sort of angry about it, right? Like a yard is like a child, right? Like, you leave it too long unattended and something really bad happens, and it always needs attention all the time. Like, yards are like that.
Yeah, I got one. Chris Lewis talking about yards and how that actually plays into his research here in the computer science department. And on your way to PhD, he's a PhD candidate. His advisor is Jim Whitehead, who's is he the director of the Games and Playable Media? There's three of them, right? There's a rotating presidency.
Yeah, I'm not sure his
thing.
official title. He's currently department chair of computer science.
So the department chair of computer science. He was also my first Gamers on Game interview.
Yes.
He helped inaugurate it and actually helped get Chris Lewis on here to talk about this fascinating subject of yours. And what's interesting is I keep thinking gamification as you're talking. It's like lighting up, and that's got to be next.
Yeah. And that's the sort of elephant in the room, right? Like gamification. Like, now that we know all this, now that we understand what games might be doing to us to motivate us to play them, why is gamification successful or not, right? My current guess and feeling and instinct is that gamification is largely failing.
All right. Well, we got to go, Chris.
And I didn't even get to say one of the 7 deadly words that got listed in this. There's all sorts of words here.
Don't say that. I'm going to have to mute you. Everybody stay tuned for Dream Scream. And thank you so much, Chris Lewis, for coming on.
Thank you.
Come back next year when you're graduating and we get to hear about how the exciting game theory. We didn't even talk about like the beginning of game theory and all that. There's so much. Thank you so much. And everybody stay tuned, please, for Dream Scream. And hey, thanks for listening. If you missed any part of this, go to gamersongame.com and you get to see it and hear it. Have fun, everybody.